Good evening, everyone. Buenas tardes, todo el mundo. My name is Regina Wiltron Bengoa, and I'm here representing the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute, straight right now from our office in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Tonight, it's a special night, a sad night, a difficult night, just like the past 3-4 nights. And today we're presenting to you the Critically Black Dialogue series, which is a talk series dedicated to exploring issues and topics that examine the deeply rooted Pan-African vision that has allowed us to survive despite our struggles and has kept us interconnected to this day. It is a space to share and produce knowledge, and it is one of many ways CCADR advances its mission of achieving cultural equity, racial, and social justice for African descendant communities. Tonight's installment of Critically Black Dialogue series is a special responsive panel to the Hurricane Fiona recovery efforts in the Caribbean. Namely, Puerto Rico, mainly Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic will be tonight here with us.
My name is Mikey Cordero, Director of New Media at the Caribbean Culture Center, African Diaspora Institute, also based here with Regina, of course, in Puerto Rico. And we're very excited about this talk, but also sad of the circumstances that, we have to come together and respond to the disaster that happened in the Caribbean this last week. I would just like to give people just a brief kind of landscape of what has happened. Hurricane Fiona, as we all know, made landfall in Puerto Rico on Sunday. And it touched down in the south west of the island in Cabo Rojo. And of course, it was a hurricane category 1. Compared to Hurricane Maria, which happened 5 years ago to the day, Hurricane Maria was about category 5 or 6. So once again, we find ourselves in similar circumstances as we did 5 years ago. And I think that is kind of what this conversation is really about. The things that we learned, what we didn't learn, and accountability of those mistakes, especially when it comes to local government and the federal government. Right now in Puerto Rico, electricity is slowly coming back, but the whole island was without electricity. The entire population of Puerto Rico was without electricity for about 2 to 3 days. And electricity has just started to come back in the last 24, 36 hours. In addition to that, closer to where the eye of the hurricane hit in terms of the southwest of Puerto Rico, flooding happened all throughout Puerto Rico, but mainly in the southwest. The flooding was very disastrous and ruined whole communities. Puerto Rico is made up of a lot of rivers, so all throughout Puerto Rico. So if you live by a river, you definitely saw flooding in your community. So there are kind of like 2 levels that are happening right now in Puerto Rico. One is the electricity and the energy grid, and the issues with the energy grid in Puerto Rico and the privatization of that energy grid recently by the company called Luma Energy. There have been protests for the last 2 years against the privatization of Puerto Rico's energy grid. And there's a lot of corruption that has to do with that deal that happened in 2020. In addition to that, the preparation for flooding around the island is also what we're going to discuss today. Knowing what happened 5 years ago, we should have been able to prepare and be able to support the most vulnerable communities when it comes to flooding, and really try to prevent another round of blue rooftops, right, from the tarps that were given out. Tonight's discussion is really about how disaster is political, and the disaster really comes in how local agencies, local governments respond to it. That is really where the disaster takes place.
Thank you, Mikey. As Mikey said, the disaster is political. It's not limited to Puerto Rico. It runs the politicization of disasters such as this should be addressed when it comes to the entire Caribbean, with inclusive of Dominican Republic, and then specifically of Fiona, Dominican Republic, Guadeloupe, Turks and Caicos, and many others islands and that were impacted by Hurricane Fiona as well. We all have been suffering for the past almost half century of this political disaster that we're in. And that's why conversations such as the ones we're going to be having today are so important. We are requiring a pan-Caribbean approach. We are all working on the ground in our respective islands, home-based nations, and conversations like the ones we're going to be having today are important in order to be able to have a more collective impact as we move forward. With no further ado, I want to introduce tonight's moderator. I'm thrilled to introduce Frances Marie Medina, dear friend, dear comrade, dear compa. Frances believes that storytelling is transformative. With more than 10 years of experience working with nonprofit organizations and advocacy groups as a communications and development consultant, Frances has a keen understanding of how to innovatively maximize use of technology and digital platforms to connect people to issues they care about, using storytelling as a tool. Since 2017, Frances has collaborated as a producer and communication strategist with Defend Puerto Rico, a collective of media makers and creatives. There she has directed and produced short documentaries and video series that amplify social justice movement, leading advocacy efforts on the island. Frances, thank you so much. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros esta noche. The floor is yours and of everyone here on our call.
Gracias. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to start off with saying that these spaces for us are sacred spaces. This work that is happening post hurricanes is an important moment for us to reflect and think about how we can put ourselves to action to ensure that the next few weeks, the next few months, and the next few decades we're focusing on a just recovery, right? It is an honor for me today to be in this space and to be moderating this conversation with the panelists. I would like to briefly introduce them, but I'm also going to ask them to talk about themselves. This space is for them. This space is for them to tell us what they need and to also talk about how we can support. So I'm going to start. Today's panelists are Xiomara Caro Diaz. She's the Executive Director of Maria Fund Puerto Rico. Anais Roque. She is an affiliate faculty for the Sustainability Institute at Ohio State University. And Dr. Ryan Mann Hamilton, who is an Associate Professor of Anthropology in CUNY LaGuardia. All of these people are active not just on the ground today and in the immediate aftermath of the hurricanes, but they're active year round, right? Talking about the issues that we are going to be discussing today. So without further ado, because the space is for them, I'd like for Xiomara to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who you are before we get and dive into the nitty gritty of why we're here today. Sia.
Thank you all. My name is Xiomara Caro. I was born in Puerto Rico, but I've had the experience of also my parents deciding as a child to move to Tampa, Florida. I am also the granddaughter of Maria Luisa, who lived somewhere close to where I am right now in New York. I was saying that I thought kind of paradoxical to be on this space or sort of a fractal example of diaspora experience. Me being here right now since yesterday, and some of the Regina and Mikey being in Puerto Rico. So I consider myself someone who experienced the going back and forth. I moved twice during my childhood and that shaped a lot of what my experience as Puerto Rican, as an other in some ways, and also a love for Puerto Rico and an understanding of what it felt like to be away. I am a communicator, I'm a connector. I care a lot about conversation about leadership and how do we sustain and support leaders in the long run, and infrastructure building, right? I care a lot also about how do we build the connections and both relationships, but then build structures around that for what we need to be able to sustain and do in the long term. And I love to dance, so I think that's the other thing. And I'm just grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Xiomara. Privileged to always be in space with you. I would like to pass it to Anais. Anais Roque, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, a little bit about your story? We're curious over here.
Hi, hola, everyone. It's nice to be here in this space, given the situation that we're all facing. My name is Anais Roque. I'm originally from Rincon, Puerto Rico, but currently working in Arizona State University as a assistant professor in anthropology. I lived in Puerto Rico until 2017 when Hurricane Maria hit the island, and I worked as a shelter administrator. So I got the opportunity to unfortunately see firsthand how the lack of justice and equity undermined the recovery process and just even the response, not even the recovery, because we obviously have not recovered. And I moved to the United States to finish my PhD program. So I study issues of food, water, and energy insecurity and their connections to health in the context of high weather impact events or disasters in this case. Still connected to research projects in Puerto Rico, working with community leaders in municipalities like Añasco, in the community of Corcovado, and also working in the United States along the US-Mexico border with the Colonia communities. And yeah, a lot of my research tries to understand how households and communities prepare for and what types of strategies they engage in to address some of these insecurities that we know are a result of structural violence and racism, environmental racism, and that, you know, as disasters are political, climate change is also a very political topic broadly, and just trying to think about how can we develop just recovery centering social and environmental justice.
Thank you so much, Anais. Excited to have you here with us today. Dr. Ryan Mann Hamilton, can you please tell us a little bit about you, your work? And I think it's important for us to also mention this conversation is about more than just Puerto Rico. It's about the different island nations that are experiencing the effects of climate change and how that's politically a conversation that's about politics, right? So Ryan, can you tell us where you are and can you tell us a little bit about you? Because today you'll be talking to us a little bit about how we can help Dominican Republic too. And I think it's important for us to highlight that because you guys are also experiencing that.
So thank you first for the invitation. You scared me with the doctor, but I'm here. So yes, my name is Ryan Mann Hamilton. I was born and raised in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. Was there for a long time, and then unfortunately had to come to the States to study and got sucked into the matrix of academic life in the United States. But my family and my mother is from Samaná, Dominican Republic. So I've been posted up looking at both sides, right? Both islands in terms of thinking about Fiona itself and hitting both sides. But itself, I'm also a member of the Afro-Latino Forum and a founding member of ISER Caribe, which is based in Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico, an organization that's been around for 10 years or so, mostly research-based and community-based programs that we do. But in the aftermath of Maria, had to mobilize, right? And we're part of the grouping that started La Brigada Solidaria del Oeste, kept working with them. When the earthquakes came around, we kept working. And now, of course, with Fiona, we will continue working. That's our commitment. And so in this case, what our commitment is also because of my family connections and also because we've worked in Samaná, to extending a hand to our sister nation in this case.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for being here. Okay, so we're going to jump in it because I think people are curious. And I want to start by asking, what is recovery looking like on the ground right now? I think obviously we want to talk about the long-term goals, but we also want to paint the picture to folks of what's really happening so they understand what the situation is. So I don't know if Xiomara, you can start us off with talking about what recovery is looking like right now on the ground from the perspective of the Maria Fund and the organizations that you're working with.
Sure. I don't know even if we can talk yet about a recovery. I think we're in a survival and deep anger and fed up stage. I don't think of even recovery will be a word. Like there's something about what we are people on the ground are experiencing, right? The fact that there's a big part of the island without water, like basic water, no electricity, hospitals. You have hospitals that have been running for days, or not running, for days without electricity. I don't think we understand yet the magnitude. I do think that the difference is after Maria, in some ways, we were kept in the dark. All of us who lived in Puerto Rico, we couldn't really see. I think the people in the diaspora were able to see. And I can remember like my brother's like face when he saw me in New York, and I didn't, like, because he watched what happened. I saw what I saw in my scale. I understood it. But I think the difference now is that we're seeing it. Like those of us that are in Puerto Rico are living it, but we're also like, there's no hiding the level of impact. So I think right now, I was even thinking about coming into this call, like, what is the death toll? Like, I'm sure there's a death toll that's growing. I don't even know if we can say, so I think right now we are at a survival stage. Like I was sharing that I haven't even talked to a coworker in 7 days. Like and we've been building a fund, like we've talked through other people. I know that she is redistributing help because I know her and because I've already heard from people. But on an island that's 100 by 35 miles, the fact that there's the roads, like there's completely destroyed. There are bridges that were built temporarily, right? So because in the last 5 years, there was no recovery because there isn't a real political interest of the people in power for Puerto Rico to recover from anything, right? Like I think, we can signal FEMA and federal government, but in reality, Puerto Rico is a colony. The United States government doesn't really see the people of Puerto Rico as people. So if they, I'm sure there are other communities that also face the brunt of that in the United States, but we are living through watching probably the worst thing of like after 5 years, things weren't rebuilt, things were temporarily done, things weren't done. People had tarps on like there was thousands of people, more than 3,000 people that still had tarps on their roofs. So I don't think we still understand the magnitude or scale. And I do think that we're in a stage of a rage of accumulation of things. So I think and I think people are doing, the difference is unfortunately, we went through this. We went through this too soon ago. So I think the difference is we have some infrastructure, some knowing, but I don't even know what to describe the last 5 or 6 days of like what we've heard, what we've seen. And I haven't yet gone to the West Side. So I think we are in a harsh moment of like just deep realization. And I really feel from so many people that were beyond a conversation of I think there's even like a jump to big change. I feel like we're in a moment that a lot of people in Puerto Rico like, this is it. This is the breaking point. This is absurd. We need to support each other. And I think those connections of solidarity are there, and that's happening. I also feel like all of us that are connecting are like, this is not enough, right? We're not, or like it's not relief. It's what we do, right? What we do to survive. And then can we have the bigger conversation now? So I feel like what we're seeing through the groups we're supporting, like the Teachers Federation, or that we are in partnership with. I think that's also the difference this time. The Maria Fund, when it started as a fund to redistribute, now we're a team of people really figuring out how to support the organizations we partnered with. And the organizations we're supporting and moving the first supports are like buying mattresses so that people can sleep, generators so that people can have some type of energy, figuring out how to get water in big quantities to communities like that. It's hard to say, but I feel like years ago, people made jokes would say that Puerto Rico, we would never live something, like we would distinguish ourselves from Dominican Republic. And, we're not like, and obviously that's not us, that's not our conversation. But there was so much of a distinction of, well, Puerto Rico has this connection to the US. It's not as bad as in Latin America. It's not as bad as the rest of the Caribbean. And I think this moment has deepened an understanding that our relationship to the United States does not change the fact that it doesn't change dramatically our conditions. Hasn't given us control of it's taking away control of our land, control of our resources, control of our cultural wealth, and that it's a time to fight back. And I think this week is just like, figuring out how to eat, drink. And so the stories we're hearing from groups is like meeting people who haven't eaten in a day too. Like that's the level we're at.
Yep. Thank you for saying that. As a communications person, it's very important for us to, check ourselves on language. Recovery isn't the thing right now. And it really is important for us to frame it in a way that people understand, right? So I want to move along to Ryan. Ryan, can you tell me a little bit? Should I call you Dr. Ryan or should I just call you Ryan? Okay, I just want to be respectful. Okay. So Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about what Brigada Solidaria Oeste is doing, and also what are you hearing from the people there, right? Since they're in the West, Brigada Solidaria Oeste is in the west part of the island, and they've been activated also since post-Maria. So tell us a little bit about what they're doing, what you're hearing from them.
Well, I just want to go back to something that Xiomara talked about, right, in terms of thinking about the differences, perhaps, between Maria and now, right? After Maria, there was no communication, right? You said you couldn't see what was going on. You couldn't get any information from the island itself. Now we're getting that information. And because of the experience of Maria, folks mobilized very quickly and were able to transmit that information, right? So we can get actual information in regards to what's needed versus thinking, oh, let's connect water, let's collect this, right? Maria was scrambling to find resources, put him on a truck, get him out, right? Get me something. Right now, it's a much more clear vision of what's needed. Obviously, food, basic water, because most people don't have it, right? I think that the data yesterday or this morning, today, 67% of the island still does not have electricity. And of course, if we think about what part of that island will be, it's going to be outside of the metropolitan area, of course. 33% of the island does not have water, right? But that's also not just a new thing. That was to this hurricane as well, right? One thing that we're going to see as Luma takes more and more time to restore energy, one thing that's coming out right now, reports-wise, is that as they're restoring some of the energy things, they're cutting lines for phone and internet, and so communication in the aftermath of that. And then, of course, all these hospitals, supermarkets, and businesses that have been running on generators and everything else, they can't continue paying. That also goes back to telecommunications, right? They have to source those in some way or form with energy. And so, right, recovery is not the question. The question now, and going back to Maria, most of the deaths weren't the actual storm. It was the aftermath of the ineptitude of the state and the federal government that then led to those deaths. And this is where we are now, in that moment. What's going on? When are they gonna give us the truth, right? And so partly that goes back to thinking about how FEMA, this little map that they just whichever, which somehow excluded the west coast of the island, which is where the hurricane hit the hardest. I mean, that's fascinating to me, and yet, right, it pisses people off, right? And it's also, again, going back to the memory of Maria, although there were all these different groups that sprung out, although there were so many resources that came out, most of it was concentrated in the metropolitan area. We got very little resources. Every once in a while, we get a trickle of things to make it to the West Coast because we are the farthest from the metropolitan area. And unfortunately, that always happens, right? So we understand the division, and we call it, right? There's a name for that on the island, Isla Metro, right? And that continues to happen over and over and over again, unfortunately, even with these large funding organizations and such. And so when you talk about the West Coast, there is a lot of destruction, not just homes, right? Agriculture, the amount of water that was all over the West Coast, right? It's not so much the winds, but the water and the water that still persists. That is the dangerous part, right? Because it's not just about, flooding and the loss of everything else and the loss of material objects, but it's also what happens to that water once it festers for a long period of time, right? We're seeing that, for example, in Rincon today, there was news about this huge sewer line that had burst and is going into the waterways. In La Playa de Ponce, for example, we see that as well, where when the pipes burst, and basically it wasn't just water, right? It was shit. shit everywhere, basically. And I mean, the disease and everything else that happens with that, the lack of adequate drinking water, and then having to find the sources, right? There's so much going on. And again, on the West Coast, it seems to be that we're forgotten, not just forgotten by the local government, by the federal government as well, and unfortunately, in many ways, by funders as well, right? So, and that goes back, there's a meme that's going around right now, which is funny and not funny at the same time. It's something that Xiomara talked about, right? That how we used to compare ourselves to Dominican Republic. Oh, you know, we're always going to be better. And so the meme is saying, like, you know, Fiona went through Dominican Republic as well, and yet they have 90% of the island has light, right? People are getting their water. The government is responding adequately. This is a government that I have no expectation of, right? They are one of the most corrupt nations in Latin America, right? That's a given. And yet they were able to mobilize their resources, put people out on the streets immediately. And yet, for example, we were seeing reports from Puerto Rico around the West Coast, right, around Cabo Rojo and different areas, who say they haven't even seen a Luma truck. They haven't seen any government representatives out there. They've seen absolutely nothing. So again, that disparity, that inequality that happens within an island, within different spaces, right, that needs to be addressed on the long term and the short term. And sometimes I don't see those conversations being had, right? So even right now, and I appreciate, right, again, I'm from Puerto Rico, but my family is Dominican as well. And so we have a lot of attention being given to Puerto Rico, which is good. We need it. But we need to extend that attention to other places that don't have the resources, that will not get the attention, that will not get the backing and support from the international community.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That's super important. And I'm glad that you mentioned it. And it's important because, you know, when we think about our relationships with our fellow island nations, at the end of the day, that interconnectedness or having those ties, it's what's going to support us moving forward when we think about what our goals are in terms of decolonization and things like that. So I'm glad that you bring that up, because we want to talk about that a little bit more later, and how we can support DR in the same space that we talk about how we can support Puerto Rico, because that's important. Anais, can you talk to us a little bit about what's happening or what you're hearing from the groups that you're in contact with? I know you mentioned Loíza, and I want you to touch on that too. Other communities that are being impacted in different ways, and the why, since this is, you know, things that you can speak on. Tell me a little bit more about that, or tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, definitely what Ryan and Xiomara, they just, you know, already hit on the big points. I have some numbers that I can share from what I've seen today. So, for example, there's 920K people still without power in Puerto Rico as of today. We have over 500,000 people still without power. And then we have over 500,000 people still without water service. Diesel is becoming a challenge in the island. So we're seeing that, you know, for example, dialysis centers are reducing the amount of hours. So similar to what Ryan mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily the hazard that kills, is the actions, right? And the cascading, in a way, and compounding effect that is happening across. I've talked to some of the community leaders that I have worked with, and some regions are okay, but others are needing, you know, support from the local municipality. And there's a big challenge in terms of having technical assistance. So, for example, we know that 2 days ago, President Biden signed the disaster declaration. And there's a big map going around through social media that shows that the metropolitan area, excluding Loíza, is the ones that were signed as part of this relief, and leaving, again, all the western side of the island. So these areas that are being purposely excluded, we know that there's a history, particularly in places like Loíza, because it's an Afro-descendant, predominantly Black community. So these structural dynamics and just racism explicitly we can see in this type of aftermaths. And it's unfortunate as well, because the central government can send technical assistance through the, you know, the same people that filled out the assessments for San Juan and for Bayamón and all these other municipalities. They could have moved those people to support the other communities that we know that, because of the trajectory and the way that Fiona hit, these are communities that have between 10 and 25 inches of water still in their houses. So the local municipalities are in the ground to the capacity that they can, so they cannot be at the same time doing the role of 5-6 people, because there's also not that many people within the municipalities to adhere at all these different levels, like opening spaces, checking the, flooded communities, landslides, right? All these things. So yeah, so broadly, all of these things are happening, and it's just, I was looking into some of the statistics, and for example, we know that the US is responsible for approximately 21% of the global green gas emissions. China has around 17%, and the European Union around 15%. So when we think about the Caribbean and why are we getting more hazards that are not natural, even though hazards have existed throughout time, the intensity and the frequency is a result of green gas emissions, and these are political and economic decisions. And places like Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, the Caribbean, Latin America, the quote-unquote global south, which are terms that I don't necessarily like to use, but to put in context, are the places that are polluting less and still are the ones that are getting impacted more and more. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts are going around.
Thank you for that, Anais. And I think you guys have really done a good job giving context of the why, right? I think one of the questions that we had lined up is like, what is the bigger picture? But because this is a conversation that we have all the time, you've already driven into it. The disaster is political. I think that's the reason why this forum is named that way, is because we understand that. I think, but not the rest of the world. And I think that that's why these conversations are important, right? I want to move into action. I want to move into talking about action, because these spaces, and the reason why we're having these conversations is because we all have a collective responsibility to take action. What does that look like? Could look a lot of different ways. We know that it's not just donating. We know that it's not just posting or reposting the efforts on the island. So I want to start with Xiomara. Talk to us about what action looks like for you, and what can the diaspora or just the international community do to support, not just on a short term, but on a long term, right? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Wrong button. Okay. Yes, I think that, I'll start with the short term because I feel it's a segue. Right? I think the call to action from us is to move resources, and resources can look like money. Resources can look like your time, if you have some type of skill, and say, I'm down to, even if you're at a distance. I think the other part is responding to what you're asked for, right? I think there is a conversation about what does critical allyship look like in these moments. For people on the ground, it's like follow the people on the ground, their lead. If they ask you for what they need is like solar lights, go and buy solar lights, and don't ask 20 questions. I think people on the ground are going to have stages of support from the Maria Fund and myself. It's like, if you are Puerto Rican, or if you know someone in Puerto Rico, connect directly to that organization. Like, we set up a fund, but really that fund is idea to channel foundation money that sometimes doesn't end up coming because there isn't a place, individuals that don't have a connection to Puerto Rico. And still throughout that fund, we are the organizations that we partnered with organizations that have capacity to connect with other groups and move resources to other groups, right? Be it through moving direct money, or be it buying whatever needs to be bought, coordinating whatever support needs to be coordinated, and executing it. And so it's really like, in the end, it's a chain of relationships, right? So, and they're all built on what is the trust that we have. So if you have someone trusted in Puerto Rico, or you want to connect, just do that. And on the Maria Fund website, we have several links and where people can see all of the groups we supported. I definitely think centering right now the needs of the South, centering right now the needs of the Central Island, doing that analysis of whoever is being left out of the map of FEMA, which for me is a clear indicator of they're not even there. That's like, oh, okay, I see that who made this map has no idea of what happened. So our map in many ways has to be inverted, right? So if FEMA published a map, it would be great probably to say then the map is the opposite. And also, I've been thinking about how do we support the leaders that are coordinating that and helping other people, right? It's blown my mind, even like the leaders that are in immediate connection with us throughout the fund. aren't sleeping well because they don't have electricity and water. I live in San Juan and I don't have electricity and water. So I can't even imagine like the people who don't have electricity and water flooding. So we have also been thinking about how do we support, who are the leaders that like also ask them, what do you need? Do you need me to put together a kit? Send it, so that you can be in condition to support other people. And then in terms of other actions, I've been thinking a lot in these days about how after Maria, many of us who think about structural change, think about action, think about what is the bigger change that we're political, we ended up doing mutual aid for so long, right? Because it was so needed. And we know things are structural, and I think we need to name things. We need to eliminate the Fiscal Control Board that was created by Congress in 2016, and that is a key infrastructure piece of how colonialism is operating in Puerto Rico. It needs to be eliminated. And I think there needs to be a stronger call to action from the diaspora. Let's set an ultimatum, like by end of year, this cannot work. And I think we need to look like that way, because if not, we end up talking about local government when for 6 years, we've had 7 people who were appointed by the President of the United States, created by a law passed by Congress, where none of us participate, in connection also to local legislation, which was really developed by IMF, like International Monetary Fund, right? So it's not that legislation that created multimillionaire conditions in Puerto Rico for millionaires and billionaires to move to Puerto Rico and not pay taxes it wasn't even designed in Puerto Rico. We did the backtracking years ago. It was designed in Wall Street. And so I think when we need to start talking about that, and even about Luma. Luma is the name of the company in Puerto Rico. The company that really created Luma is called Quanta, and they operate in the United States and they operate in Canada. And so I think that there's something about pulling the veil of the corporations and the political infrastructure and deciding to also move into action around there. And I would say that's also an opportunity for the diaspora, right? That the people in the diaspora are sending relief or coordinating while people in Puerto Rico can get back up to even consider talking about an action, to even consider some of these demands. I think those that are watching internationally can signal and say, there is a political infrastructure that can do something. It's called the Congress of the United States. It can eliminate the Fiscal Control Board to start the conversation. And there's a private company. It's called Quanta. And that's the company that has the contract that we have to end. And I'll lastly say the negotiations that are happening right now between the Fiscal Control Board around the debt of the electric company, Puerto Rico, those need to stop too, because those are also the things that continue while everyone's watching this situation spiral out.
Thank you so much, Xiomara. I think I want to emphasize that advocacy for the long term is what we need to start thinking about when it comes to Puerto Rico. How do we advocate as a diasporican? Right? I didn't understand the political landscape of Puerto Rico until I moved to Puerto Rico. And it was through learning and listening from the people that I understood how to figure out, right? The advocacy is important, right? And I also would like to give that as an offering, that when organizations in Puerto Rico ask you to advocate for them, do it. Call your legislators and do it, because that's what we need. We need to shake things up, like politically. So I want to emphasize that the Maria Fund, that's what they look to do, is to build power for communities. And I think that the Fiona Response Fund has an intention of also doing that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Ryan, can you talk to us a little bit about what collective responsibility looks like right now, not just in the context of Puerto Rico, but also for our island nations, our sister island nations, including DR? Please tell us what can people do, and what does action look like, or can look like?
I want to thank Xiomara because, sorry, we do have to name them, and I'll add a name, AES, right? They're based in Delaware, and they have, of course, not just in Puerto Rico, but also Punta Catalina in Dominican Republic, which in fact was constructed in the aftermath of having the Dominican government and the people in Samaná having won lawsuits against AES because of the rock ash that was actually brought from Puerto Rico and deposited in Samaná and Montecristi, right? So these connections are there clearly, but they're not always being made, right? So I guess going back to your original question, inform is one, organize is a second. I say agitate because it's not just organizing, right? You have to push the buttons and push them in every single direction. And of course, unfortunately, it's fundraising. And fundraising, right, is not just about money, right? It's about resources, but it's also, when I think about it, it's about ideas, right? Because at the end of the day, right, the short term is what we're doing right now. Like, we need to get solar lanterns, we need to get food, we need, right? Once we get past that stage, we need ideas, we need support, and we need collaboration across different spaces, right? So that goes back to thinking about energy, thinking about, for example, one of the things that we were doing with ISET Caribe right before this happened was we actually rented a space in Cabo Rojo that we're going to use now as a space to storage and everything else. But the space was intended to be able to have researchers and other folks who are interested in collaborating with Puerto Rico come stay at the space. And downstairs, we were going to create a community water lab, right? Because there are so many communities that don't have access to adequate drinking water, right? And that takes equipment, that takes energy, that takes people power to do all that, and resources as well, right? Which, of course, the local government or federal government is not going to do because they're not interested in the long term. They might give you a little test and be like, oh, your water's fine. It's full of arsenic, but you won't die today. It's okay, right? So those are really, right, how do we inform ourselves about the long term, right? No estamos en un vacío, como uno dice. I don't know how to say that in English. But we have to communicate about those resources, about the realities of that, right? In the aftermath of Maria, the first thing that we should have done was to go towards solar energy. And of course, like the Army Corps of Engineers suggested that we have a nuclear energy facility in Puerto Rico to make up for this. I mean, these ridiculous ideas that go against the reality of what you can do, go against the reality of what people want as well, right? So literally no one is listening. And we have seen, right, that there has been an immediate growth in the solar industry in Puerto Rico, but it's for folks who can afford it, right? If you can't afford it, you will not have a solar system on your home, right? And most people cannot afford it. There are not government incentives provided towards that in any way or form, right? So instead of being supporters of something or supporters of people's own vision for their own future, the government creates an obstacle, right? And as you said, Xiomara, right, it's not just the local government, right? It's coming from above, again, because we are a colony. That's the reality. But still, right, you would think that at least there would be some type of struggle to think about some of those futures. And I don't see that struggle at all from local politicians, right? They're much more enamored with other things. So I think the responses are there. Yeah. It's more about how do we do it? And unfortunately, you cannot, right? If we do it without the state, in this case, whatever the state looks like or what it should look like or how we imagine it to be, how do you maintain it? You can't, right? This idea of resilience, which everyone loves this damn word right now. Oh, resilience, resilience, resilience. What it points to is that the community has to do everything. But then what is the purpose of the state? What is the purpose of paying taxes? What is the purpose of all that crap, right? If they're not going to do anything for you, then just get rid of them, right? Then let's just run it ourselves. But unfortunately, right, I'm not sure if that's possible at this moment in time. So, the combination of these things, we really it has to be given deep thought. And I think that hopefully that's what is causing folks to do in this process. Maria was like the turning point to me. Like, people said, oh shit. Like, after that, they're like, oh, now when this came around and when the next one will come around, I think, to me, at least, the thinking is different. It's not to say we still have the solutions at hand, but the thinking is different. And that's where it starts, right? That folks are ready to mobilize, folks are ready to say, and they're fed up, right? And they are coming together. And this is, I was on an interview earlier with NPR, and I said, and they said, that's all doom and gloom. I said, yes, it is, because it's a reality. But the beautiful thing to me about this moment and the many moments that we've faced in the past and will continue to face is that it shows, again, the power of community. This is when folks come together. This should not be the only moment when folks come together, right? But it is a moment. And that energy is what needs to be taken forward, right? That beyond political parties, beyond our political positions, beyond our religion, right? We are from an island. We are Caribbean peoples, right? Not just on the island itself, but again, thinking beyond these spaces. How do we connect to each other, to that colonial reality that we all faced, right? To the racism that we still all face because of the way this world is structured by power itself. We are not alone. We choose sometimes to see ourselves as sort of alone, but we are not. And if we connect, we'll find that our stories are very similar. And I say, together we can do so much.
I agree. I want you to quickly, Ryan, reiterate those 5 points that you said. I know you got them written down because I saw you look at a notebook. Inform.
No notebook. But you asked us earlier about collective responsibility, and I took that seriously, right? I said inform, organize, agitate, and fundraise. I guess there was 4.
Yes, 4. And I think that is what people can do right now. At the very least, don't wait until the disaster or the aftermath passes. Do it now. Okay, and the time is now. Anais, tell us a little bit more of how people should spring into action, right? Because people are asking.
I think there's not much I can add to this, but 2 things come to mind. One, elections are coming in the United States now in November. So both the Puerto Rican diaspora and the Dominican diaspora can call local representatives and Congress people because, we are voters here, right? So there is an opportunity to get some pressure to call, like Xiomara mentioned, right, to give these names and call for action in Puerto Rico. And the other one is just really, it's at the end of the day, use this fury, this fuel for the next, for the next election as well. Because unfortunately, right, like after Hurricane Maria and after everything that happened with ex-governor Ricardo Rosselló, the people got together and marched and, we got that governor out. And unfortunately, a worse one was put in power. And as we saw in the, the turn of the election, this new governor, Pierluisi, he won only with 32% of the votes. And voting, I'm not saying that voting is the one way to do it. It's just one of the multiple ways that we should be thinking about how to, as a collective, be able to address this, because we're also seeing in the ground that our community leaders are tired. They've been doing this for so many years, and it can become a burden. So, right, people are leaving the archipelago of Puerto Rico, people are leaving the Dominican Republic, flying to find other opportunities, and that creates also some dynamics on the ground that can challenge future events that unfortunately are going to continue happening. So we need to have empowered people that share this vision of what, the future of Puerto Rico, the future of Dominican Republic looks like for everyone, right? Intersectionally thinking about those things. So those are really the 2 things that I can add to, the already great ways to call for action by Xiomara and Ryan.
Thank you so much. It's important. Somebody else mentioned that in a meeting today. Elections, they're coming up. It's the time to put pressure on people for them to put an agenda together for Puerto Rico and for us to evaluate and tell them what we want and don't want. Okay, so we have 10 minutes left in the conversation. I wanted to open up space for anyone who wants to ask questions to our panelists. If not, I think we'll close by, right, what is our call to action in this space? We have several. But in this moment right now, I'd like for Xiomara, if no one's gonna offer any questions, to tell us how people can donate right now and where they should be donating to. Talk a little bit about the Fiona Response Fund and let people know how they can direct their resources.
Sure, I'll be watching if there's a question. I would say, so the Fiona Community Response Fund, we set it up hand in hand in partnership with 8 other organizations. The website to donate is fionaresponse.org. I will also lift up Brigada Solidaria del Oeste. I feel like Ryan being here, part of what I was wondering is like, I think it is important to move on those parallels, right? So if people have specific connections, do that. And the Fiona Response Fund is partnering with the Teachers Federation, with Taller Salud de Puerto Rico, with ACER, which is in communication with other groups, right? Campamento contra las cenizas de Peñuela. So that FionaResponse.org is the easiest way for us at the Maria Fund, and it's set outside, like parallel to the Maria Fund. So we've set it up in a way that is more agile to move resources. We are putting the infrastructure and the administrative and coordinating with the organizations. And I think the other thing that comes to mind is just as a closing, when I was hearing Ryan and Anais talking about, this conversation about elections, government, the role of government, we are not substituting ourselves. I think about, in Spanish, we call it lo común, right? How do we not lose a belief in what is the common, like the common project, the idea of the collective? And I think that that's where we need to be careful with placing all of the responsibility on organizations and community. And we'll survive and we'll take care of each other. It's like, yeah, but we also I still believe that there is a common project that socially, right? That maybe the model of government that we've had up to now, 2022, is crumbling as the climate and earth is telling us this doesn't work anymore, people. That doesn't mean for me that we need to abandon the idea of collective participation and doing something together that responds to needs. So, and also respond to shared values. It's not just about Puerto Rico, it's about a world vision. And I think sharing values around that world vision and thinking about what does a collective infrastructure look like, that would look like in the future. So yes, FionaResponse.org. That's the website to give specifically for the support we're organizing on the ground.
Thank you so much, Anais and Ryan. I also want you guys to give space to, where should people support the organizations that you are working with, right? How can people direct resources to Brigada Oeste Solidaria, right? Anais, si tú conoces, sorry, I switch up into Spanish sometimes. Anais, if you know of specific organizations in Loíza or in the other communities in Añasco that you work with, please, this is the time to not be shy. This is what I've been telling our clients. This is the time to not be shy, right? You can't be shy right now. We have to ask for what we need. We have to ask for what our communities need, and we can't wait. So what is Ryan or Anais?
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Go for it.
No, because I mean, again, we partner with La Brigada Solidaria del Oeste because we have always partnered with them since its inception. But through Reset Caribe, we are taking funds more than anything because we have the flexibility then to funnel those funds to the projects that we are working with, right? Not have to sort of be beholden, I guess. But in Samaná, we're working with La Iglesia Evangélica, right? La Iglesia Metodista, the Club Rotario de Samaná, and smaller orgs as well, which are based in Las Galeras. So we're trying to get some funds to them. Mostly, again, it's construction items is what they need, really. At least that's what they've indicated to us. In Puerto Rico itself, with Un Nuevo Amanecer, which is from La Playa de Ponce, La Casa de Arte y Cultura de la Playa de Ponce as well, we're collaborating. And with some of the CAMs that are on the West Coast, the Centro de Apoyo Mutuo on the West Coast as well. Right, again, so we always reach out and we always collaborate and work with these folks. But you can, some of them, right, because they don't have nonprofit status or whichever, or we serve sometimes just as a fiscal sponsor, again, to get the money and resources to them that is adequate.
Thank you so much, Anais. I know you shared the list, and I think CCADI will be also sharing more information after this panel with people. But if you have any particular group that you think is in dire need right now, please.
Yes, so I share that list, and there's so a group of colleagues in the diaspora and in Puerto Rico that are part of the Iniciativa de Ecodesarrollo de la Bahía de Jobos y de Abajo. They are also developing they have a GoFundMe. So I'm gonna put that in the link. So they are helping communities in the Salina Guayama region. And I think everybody should donate to them as well. So, and they're, grassroots led for, 15 plus years, doing community work and supporting particularly initiatives around environmental justice and promoting, a just energy transition towards solar. So I'll put their information in the chat as well.
Yes, and Ida Abajo right now, one of the things that came from the communities in Salinas and the Southeast is literally people lost their beds and there's no water. There's no furniture. Yeah. And if we want to talk about immediate needs, those are immediate needs. And the fundraiser that Anais is talking about, which we'll share later, I see the host just added it there. They're trying to reach their goal. So please galvanize resources that way. Okay, we're at 6:56, so 4 minutes. I don't see any questions coming in, but what I would like to do is end on a positive note, right? One of the things that I have seen happening in Puerto Rico is, ese refrán or that saying, el pueblo salva el pueblo, or Puerto Rico will save itself. It is true, but that's not what we want. But I have seen and witnessed a level of community, a level of family, a level of just beautiful organizing that for me as a first time experiencing a hurricane in Puerto Rico, it has been what I think sustains us, right? I start to get a little emotional because this is just what it is right now, but the level of love that exists in our people and how we share that love with each other is the invitation that I want to give to everyone watching this panel, our global community, people who are interested in supporting. We need love. We need you to love us back, right? And we need you to love us by taking action. We've talked about all the different ways we can do that, but I also want to emphasize that we have to hold people accountable. So it is the time. Now is the time to use yourself as an advocate for Puerto Rico. Go to Washington. Come to Fortaleza when we have a protest trying to kick out the next governor, right? Do that with us because that's what we want. So I just wanted to end with that note. The love is beautiful. Love us back. The invitation is to listen to the people and to make sure that we do what needs to be done now, not wait for another disaster. And to not forget, right? One of the things that I want people to forget, don't forget about us in a week when the mass media stops covering Puerto Rico or the rest of the island nations impacted. That's going to happen. It's already happening, right? So don't forget about Puerto Rico in a week. Find the alternative media sources. Find the other collectives who are reporting. CPI, Center de Periodismo Investigativo in Puerto Rico. They're the ones to follow. And then there's a lot of non-traditional other media makers out there like Defend Puerto Rico, Consentimiento, a bunch of folks that are informing. So please do your due diligence, right? Find the information, take action, and don't forget about us in a week. That's all. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything. Regina, Mikey, would you like to come back on and talk about how Gadi is moving too? Oh, they left. Okay, great. So I would like to end with a thank you. So all of the panelists here, much love. Seguimos. I'm here for whatever. And you guys got my number. So we'll keep going. Also, CCADI, Gadi is here to continue to create spaces for this type of dialogue. So please don't hesitate to contact if you want more spaces like this. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and have a great night. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for the opportunity.